The needle broke through the cracked palm of Abel Cross's work glove just as he stepped into the tack shop doorway. Martha Lane did not look up. She braced the old leather against her table, drew the waxed thread tight, and watched the split close beneath her fingers. The gloves had belonged to Abel for nearly 20 years. His wife had given them to him before her final winter, and for 3 years Martha had been keeping them alive. "You've near built a second pair inside the first," Abel said. "That would cost you more." His mouth shifted, not quite a smile. At 59, Abel carried himself like a man used to, lifting what needed lifting and saying little about the weight. His hands were still strong, broad across the knuckles, scarred by wire, weather, and cattle rope. Martha slid the glove over a wooden form. "You tore the palm-lifting fence posts again." "I was lifting one post?" "You grip too hard when you're tired." Abel glanced at her. She always knew how he had damaged the leather before he told her. That seemed to trouble him more than the price. Behind Martha, her uncle moved boxes toward the front counter. The shop smelled of oil, dust, and new saddle hide. But her repair corner held its own history: 3 order cards, a row of thread spools, and the brass-handled awl her father had used. She pressed it through the reinforcement strip. The handle struck a buckle and took a bright scratch. The bell above the door rang. Silas Mercer entered carrying a parcel and the confidence of a man whose work had never been mistaken for a favor. He was 34, well-dressed for a saddle maker, and owned a larger shop 2 towns east. "For Cross?" he asked, nodding at the glove. Abel stiffened. Martha kept sewing for the man who brought it. Silas unwrapped the parcel. Inside lay a new pair of brown work gloves, smooth and clean. "These would cost less than the hours you've put into those old things." "Not if the old things matter." Silas looked from Martha to Abel. "Leather wears out. Sensible people replace it." Abel picked up the finished glove and flexed the repaired palm. The seam held without pulling. Martha had matched the curve of his grip so closely the patch disappeared when he closed his hand. He cleared his throat. If these hands were 20 years younger, they might be worth holding instead of patching. Silas went still. Martha met Abel's eyes. She had spent 3 years softening leather he would not replace, taking half payment when he was short, and pretending she did not notice how long he stood beside her table after the work was done. "They have been worth caring for all along," she said. Abel's fingers stopped moving. For one breath, the shop held only the creak of the sign outside. Then Abel laid exact payment on the table, pulled on both gloves, and left without another word. Silas watched the doorway close. You cannot build a future waiting on a man who apologizes for having one. Martha gathered the loose thread. "I am building a future at this bench." Her uncle came from behind the counter holding the account book. His face had the careful look he wore before delivering bad news. "Then you need 9 more paid auction orders," he said. 12 by Saturday, or I sell the bench and tools with the rest of the shop. Silas placed a train schedule beside her 3 order cards. "My offer stands until auction morning," he said. "Come work in my shop and come east with me or lose the chance." Martha looked at the empty doorway Abel had passed through, then at the scratched brass handle of her awl. Saturday was 4 days away. By sunrise, Martha had moved the 3 order cards to the center of her table and opened her uncle's account book beside them. She added the repair fees from the previous month, subtracted thread, oil, leather scraps, and the small share her uncle charged for space. The numbers were not generous, but they were honest. Her bench had earned more than the front counter in 6 of the last 8 weeks. Her uncle leaned over her shoulder. "That does not pay for sentiment." "It does not need to." Martha turned the book so he could see the column. "It pays for work." He studied the figures, then rubbed a thumb along the page. 12 paid orders by Saturday, and I will sell you the bench on installments. Miss the number, and Silas buys the room with the rest. Silas had already begun arranging sample bridles near the front window. He moved as though the space had been promised to him. "I could save you 4 days of worry," he said. "Bring your tools east. I have customers enough to keep your hands busy all year. My name would be on the work. The shop carries my name." Martha closed the account book. Silas softened his voice. "You would have wages, a proper room above the shop, and no need to bargain with ranchers over pennies. And the customers I bring, they would become Mercer customers." There it was. security, polished and respectable, with every decision already made. Martha cut 12 squares from stiff paper and wrote one number on each. She pinned the first three above her table, then carried the remaining cards to the front window. A sign beneath them read, "Auction repairs, harness, cinches, traces, and work leather." Silas watched her pin it straight. "You are stubborn. I keep accounts. Stubbornness does not add correctly." The bell rang before he could answer. Abel entered with his hat low and both gloves tucked beneath one arm. He did not come to the repair table at once. He examined a row of bridles he had no intention of buying, then glanced at Silas's samples. Martha waited. At last, Abel crossed the room and placed 2 coins beside her awl. "You undercharged me yesterday. I charged what the repair was worth. You spent more time than that. That was my choice." His gaze moved to the order cards. "Mercer helping you now. He offered me work." Silas answered from the window. A future, more accurately. Abel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Martha picked up one glove and turned it beneath the light. The new palm patch had held. Along the thumb, however, the leather had begun to separate where the seam met an older repair. "This needs reinforcement before you use it again. It can wait." "No, the pull will travel into the thumb joint. Once that tears, I may not be able to save the shape." Abel reached for the glove, but Martha kept it on the table. "You do not owe me extra money," she said, "and I do not need pity disguised as payment." Color rose beneath the weathering on his face. "That is not what I meant." "Then say what you meant." The shop fell quiet. Abel looked toward Silas, toward her uncle, then down at the glove between Martha's hands. The care she had given it was visible in every darkened patch and doubled seam. So was the strain he had brought back. He took both gloves from the table. "Martha, you have done enough. The thumb will split, then it splits." He pulled on the damaged pair, though the right glove resisted his hand. The weakened seam opened another fraction beneath his thumb. "You will not have to trouble yourself with them again," he said. Then Abel walked out, carrying the only thing he had allowed her to preserve and refusing the repair that might have kept it whole. The rain held off through morning, leaving Willow Creek under a low gray sky and a wind that pushed dust along the boardwalk. Martha worked with her sleeves rolled above the wrist. By noon, 2 ranch hands had studied the order cards in the window, but neither committed. One asked whether she could mend a draft collar before Saturday. The other wanted to know whether a woman's stitching would hold under a full wagon load. "Bring me the leather," Martha said. Near 1 o'clock, a consignor named Harlan Pike carried in a heavy breast harness from the auction pens. Decorative stitching crossed the center, but one trace hung lower than the other. "Bought it repaired last month," he said. "Pull's crooked now." Silas came from the front room and ran a thumb over the bright thread. "Looks sound enough." Martha bent the damaged side against the grain. The leather did not flex evenly. Beneath the decorative stitching, something stiff resisted her fingers. Whoever repaired this covered the split instead of removing it. Harlan frowned. "Can you prove that?" Martha reached for her awl. The brass handle turned slightly beneath her palm, but she steadied it and cut the first stitches. A thin strip of brittle hide had been glued across the break, then hidden beneath the ornamental pattern. Martha peeled it back. The original leather had stretched nearly white around the rivet hole. Another hard pull could have torn the entire trace free. Harlan looked toward the street, where his team stood tied. "I was planning to haul 2 bulls with that." "You would have reached the first hard turn," Martha said. "Maybe." The ranch hands moved closer. Martha removed the false patch, trimmed the weakened edge, and cut a new reinforcement from dense shoulder hide. She beveled the edges, punched fresh holes beyond the stretched grain, and set the rivets where the load would spread instead of gathering at one point. Her awl dragged against the hardened leather. She sharpened it on a stone, then drove it through again. Silas folded his arms. "You are adding weight." "I am moving the strain." She finished the seam with plain dark thread. It was not handsome enough for display, but it lay flat and even. Outside, Harlan looped the repaired trace around a hitching post. 2 men pulled while Martha watched the grain. The leather tightened. The new seam held. Harlan pulled harder. Nothing shifted. The first ranch hand nodded toward the order cards. "Put me down for that collar." The second set a cracked cinch strap on Martha's table. and mine. Before Harlan left, he added 2 more repairs from his wagon and paid deposits on all of them. Martha wrote each name carefully and pinned 4 fresh cards above her bench. 7 of 12. Her uncle counted them twice. 5 more. Silas picked up the discarded decorative patch and broke it between his fingers. Pretty work can hide bad judgment, Martha said. So can plain work, he answered, though without his earlier certainty. Late in the afternoon, Martha carried finished reins to the front counter and saw Abel across the street. He stood beside the feed store wearing a new glove on his left hand. It was pale, stiff, and too large at the wrist. On his right, he still wore the old leather glove his wife had given him. The torn thumb seams showed even from a distance. Abel noticed Martha looking. He closed his hand and turned the damaged side toward his coat. Then a rider came hard down the north road. Mud streaked along his horse's legs. He reined in outside the shop and called for Martha's uncle. Wind took part of the cross corral, he said. 2 rails down and the holding line twisted. Abel sent the cattle into the lower pen, but he stayed to set it right before the rain comes. Martha looked toward the darkening ridge. The rider glanced at her repair table. He is working alone, and that old glove split clean through before I left. Thunder rolled beyond the hills. Martha reached for her repair chest. By the time Martha reached the Cross Ranch, the first hard drops had begun to strike the dust. Abel stood inside the north corral with one boot braced against a leaning post. A twisted holding strap cut across the rail, and 2 frightened steers pressed against the lower fence while the wind worried the boards. Martha, he called, get back to town. She set her repair chest beneath the barn overhang. Hold the post, I said. And I heard you. The right glove had split through the thumb. Rain had darkened the old leather almost black, and the torn seam gaped whenever Abel tightened his grip. His left hand wore the new store-bought glove, already slick and folding at the wrist. Martha crossed the mud, ducked beneath the rail, and examined the strap. The buckle tongue had bent. The leather around it had swollen with rain and begun to peel. If this tears, the rail goes with it, she said. I can replace the line tomorrow. The cattle will not wait. She opened her chest, pulled out shoulder hide, and cut away the weakest section. Abel kept the post steady while she threaded the replacement through the buckle and punched new holes beyond the soaked grain. Wind drove grit beneath her cuffs. The brass handle of her awl twisted in her palm. She tightened her grip and pushed again. The wooden collar shifted loose. Martha, hold the post. A steer struck the lower rail. Abel leaned his full weight into the timber, and the torn glove opened farther across his thumb. Martha wrapped the awl handle with a strip of leather, knotted it hard, and drove the point through the wet strap. The repair was not handsome, but the load settled evenly when she cinched it down. Ease it, she said. Abel shifted the post. The strap held. Together they reset the rail and led the cattle into the inner pen. Only when the gate latched did the pressure leave Abel's shoulders. Inside the barn, rain rattled on the roof. Martha placed his old gloves on a feed crate near the lantern. The leather had stiffened with cold, and grit clung inside the torn seams. You were told not to trouble yourself with them, Abel said. I came for the corral. You brought thread for the corral. I bring thread wherever leather is failing. He gave a tired breath that might once have become a laugh. Martha cleaned the mud from the glove, worked oil into the thumb, and loosened the hardened edge. Abel watched her fit the torn pieces together. She gave them to me in October. He said winter would finish the old pair. Martha kept stitching. She was gone before spring. The lantern flame shifted between them. I thought buying another pair would admit these had ended, Abel said. Then I thought wearing them out would be worse. So you brought them to me. You made them useful again. That is what repair is. He looked at her hands. You always make it sound simple. It is not simple. It is still possible. Martha drew the final stitch tight, then held the glove open. Abel hesitated before placing his hand inside it. She eased the leather over his knuckles and pressed the rebuilt seam flat against his thumb. The fit was worn to him, not new, but it closed around his hand without tearing. For one quiet moment, he let her keep hold of his wrist. Then his gaze dropped to the mud on her skirt, the scratched awl beside her, and the rain running from his hat brim. Silas can give you a dry shop, he said. Martha released him. That is not what we were speaking about. He can give you years I do not have. You do not get to spend mine for me. Abel pulled off the gloves and set them on the crate between them. A younger man can offer you a cleaner life. A cleaner life is not always an honest one. His face tightened as though the words had found the place he guarded most. Take Mercer's offer, Martha. She stared at the gloves, rain darkened and newly mended. Abel stepped into the storm without them. By morning, the rain had hardened the ruts outside the tack shop and left Abel's gloves stiff on Martha's table. She turned them once beneath the window light. Mud had dried along the cuffs. The thumb seam she had rebuilt still held, but the leather had darkened wherever his hand had strained against it. Then she set them beside the account book and reached for Harlan Pike's second trace. Her uncle watched from the front counter. You are leaving those? They are not mine to decide for. The wrapped handle of her awl pressed rough against her palm as she punched through the trace. She finished Harlan's repair, then a draft collar, then the cracked cinch strap left by the ranch hand who had doubted her stitching. Each customer paid a deposit. Each name went into the book. By noon, 3 new cards hung above her bench. 10 of 12. The work drew people. So did the story. A woman buying lamp oil asked whether Abel had truly left Martha standing in his barn. 2 cattle buyers spoke near the door about Silas's offer, as though her future were an auction lot already marked for sale. Martha did not answer either of them. She kept her eyes on the leather and her figures exact. Silas arrived carrying a narrow folder and a folded train schedule. He noticed the gloves before he noticed the 10 cards. He left them again. He said, "He left before I could return them." Silas laid the folder beside her account book. Then perhaps he has made his choice. Martha tightened a final knot and cut the thread clean. Some people believe love begins when grief ends. But grief does not end. It learns a different shape. The harder question is whether a person can honor what was lost without refusing what is still offered. How long should kindness wait before it is allowed to ask for a name? Silas opened the folder. The paper inside listed wages, a room above his shop, and a share of repair fees after the first year. At the bottom, in his careful hand, he had written that she would travel east with him after the auction. You would never have to worry about 12 orders again, he said. Martha read every line. The customers would belong to your shop. They would, my prices, set by me, my account book, part of the business. And my name, Silas hesitated. Martha. People would know whose work it was. That is not the same as owning it. He rested both hands on the table. I am offering you stability. More than that, if you will let me. She understood what he meant. He was not cruel. He would likely be generous by his own measure. But the life he offered had already been arranged, with her labor fitted neatly beneath his sign. Martha turned to her account book. 7 orders had been confirmed before the rain. 3 more now carried paid deposits. 10 in all. 2 remained. She added the figures twice, then pushed the folder back. I will answer you at the auction, she said. Silas's mouth hardened. You may lose both choices by waiting. Then they were never mine. After he left, Martha wrapped Abel's gloves in brown paper. She tied them with plain cord, placed them beneath her cloak, and closed the shop before dusk. The Cross Ranch lay under a clean, cold sky. Water dripped from the barn roof, and the repaired corral line stood taut against the posts. Abel was carrying feed when she entered the yard. He stopped at the sight of the parcel. You repaired them, he said. I had already repaired them before you walked away. She held out the package. He did not take it. Keep them until I can pay you. This is not about payment. His eyes moved toward the barn, where he had left her to gather her tools alone. Martha placed the parcel on the fence rail between them. For 3 years, you brought me those gloves whenever they tore, she said. You trusted me with every split seam, every worn palm, every piece of them you were afraid to lose. Abel said nothing. But you will not trust me with the reason you keep coming back. His hand tightened around the feed bucket. Martha stepped away from the rail. I will not mend them again unless you can honestly ask for what you want from me. She left the gloves between them and walked toward the road. Behind her, the paper cord snapped. By Friday afternoon, the auction yard had begun to fill with wagons, cattle pens, and men who wanted every strap and trace sound before Saturday. Martha worked beneath the tack shop awning with her sleeves rolled and her order cards pinned where anyone passing could see them. 10 bore names. 2 remained blank. The first difficult job came from a freight driver whose cinch strap had swollen in the rain and dried twisted around the buckle. Silas examined it and said the leather should be replaced. Not before the auction, the driver said, I need it tonight. Martha soaked only the stiffened section, eased the grain open with a bone folder, then cut away the cracked tongue without weakening the rest. The leather-wrapped handle of her awl held as she punched new holes and stitched in a denser piece from her own stock. The driver pulled the repaired strap between both hands. It will hold, Martha said. Oil it before winter. He paid and signed the 11th card. The second repair arrived before she finished the entry. A wagon trace had split near the chain, where grit beneath the keeper had cut the hide almost through. Its owner wanted a surface patch. That will hide it, Martha said. It will not carry it. She removed the keeper, cleaned the grit, and rebuilt the weak section with 2 narrow layers crossed against the original grain. Her awl point slipped against the hardened edge. The wrapped handle scraped her palm, but she reset the angle and drove it through. The owner hitched the trace to an empty wagon and urged the team forward. The leather tightened, the chain rang, and the repair stayed flat. He counted out the fee. Martha wrote his name on the 12th card. Her uncle brought the installment paper and checked the deposits against her account book. The bench, tools, and repair accounts stay with you, he said. First payment after the next cattle sale. Martha signed beneath him. Silas stood near the doorway. You have proved you can keep the bench. I knew the figures before I began. That does not answer what I offered. No, she said, it does not. After the last customer left, Martha lowered the awning and carried the order book inside. 12 cards hung above the scarred table. The brass awl, its handle wrapped in darkened leather, lay beside them. The bell rang once. Abel entered holding the old gloves. The brown paper was gone. One cuff had torn where the snapped cord had caught it, and the thumb seam bore fresh dirt, as though he had turned the gloves over in his hands all night. I came to ask for a repair, he said. Martha looked at the cuff. That is not the part you were told to ask about. Abel placed the gloves on the table but did not release them. I kept them because Anna gave them to me. He said, I kept coming back because you made them useful. I told myself those were the same reason. Martha waited. They were not. His hand opened. I have asked you to preserve every part of my life except the part that might still choose one. What are you asking now, she said. For your time, not your pity, not another favor I can pretend is ordinary. He drew one glove toward him. And for you to show me how to mend what I can, instead of leaving all the stitching to you. Martha threaded a needle and placed it in his bare hand. She showed him where to pierce the torn cuff. Abel's first stitch sat crooked. His second pulled too tight. She made him loosen it and try again. When the small repair was secure, his uneven thread remained beside her precise seam. Martha reinforced the edge, then set the gloves between them. I will walk beside a man who asks honestly, she said. I will not wait while he decides whether he deserves to be seen. Abel nodded. Then I had better decide before someone else does. Auction morning broke bright and cold. Martha opened her repair stand beside the cattle pens with all 12 order cards displayed and her signed installment agreement beneath the account book. Silas approached in his traveling coat and placed a train ticket on the bench. Come east with me, he said. Before Martha could answer, the buyers nearest the gate turned. Abel Cross had entered the auction yard wearing the mended gloves. Auction noise thinned around Martha's repair stand. Silas kept one hand on the train ticket. Abel stopped 10 feet away, hat in his left hand, both old gloves dark against his coat. The patches across the palms caught the morning light. One cuff showed the uneven stitch he had made beneath Martha's direction. Silas followed her gaze. You asked for time, he said. The train leaves at 4. Martha placed the ticket beside her account book. Then she opened the signed installment agreement where her uncle's name stood above hers. 12 paid orders, she said. The bench, tools, and repair accounts remain mine. Her uncle stepped beside the stand. Every deposit is entered. Every job was earned. A freight driver raised the trace Martha had repaired. Mine carried a loaded wagon here this morning. Harlan Pike lifted the breast harness from his rail, and this pulled straight from the North Road. No one applauded. They did something that mattered more. 2 ranchers moved toward Martha's order board, and one asked her price for rebuilding a cracked collar. Silas looked at the customers beneath her sign. You have proven you can work. I was never uncertain of that. I offered more than wages. I know. Martha pushed the ticket back across the scarred bench. But I will not leave because people are embarrassed by the life I choose. And I will not place my name beneath yours merely to make my work respectable. Silas's disappointment showed, but he did not turn cruel. You may find independence lonelier than you expect. Perhaps, but it will be mine. He folded the ticket into his coat, collected his sample case, and walked toward the depot road. The question he left behind settled over Abel. He could have waited until evening, when the buyers were gone and the town had nothing to witness. Instead, he crossed the yard and laid both gloved hands on Martha's bench. These gloves were given to me by my wife, he said. The nearest conversations faded. Anna knew I would wear a tool until there was nothing left to hold together. After she died, I treated these the same way I treated everything else. I called wearing something out loyalty. His right thumb flexed beneath Martha's repair. For 3 years, Martha patched every place I damaged. I let the town believe she was saving leather because it was easier than admitting she was saving something in me I had decided was finished. Martha's hand rested beside the wrapped awl. Yesterday, she made me put in one stitch myself. It is the crooked one. A few men glanced at the cuff, but Abel did not smile for them. She never asked me to forget my wife. She asked me to stop using grief as an excuse to refuse what is still living. The words cost him. His shoulders remained set as though he expected judgment from beyond the pens. He removed his right glove. The bare hand beneath it was weathered, scarred, and unsteady only at the fingers. Martha Lane, he said, will you walk home with me? She looked at the offered hand. As your repair woman. No, as a woman I hope will let me court her. Martha did not take his hand at once. Will you ask me in private tomorrow? 2. When there is no one here to prove anything to. Yes, and next week, if you allow it, and when someone says you are too old, or I am foolish. Abel's hand remained open. Then they will have said something neither of us has to obey. Martha placed her hand in his. The change around them was quiet, but immediate. Her uncle removed the Mercer sample sign from the window. Harlan set another damaged trace beside her account book. The freight driver pointed 2 buyers toward her bench. Her work had not become valuable because Abel chose her. It had already proved its value. But when he closed his bare hand around hers, he gave the town no room to call her care ordinary again. Martha turned the 13th order card face up. Monday, she told Harlan. Then she stepped from behind the bench. Abel left the removed glove beside the wrapped awl and walked with her through the auction yard, his bare hand holding hers where everyone could see. 3 weeks after the auction, Martha climbed a short ladder and fixed a new sign above the tack shop's side door. Martha Lane, Leather Repair and Accounts. Abel stood below with one hand steadying the ladder. He wore the old gloves without trying to hide their darkened palms. Layered patches, or the crooked stitch along the right cuff. Left side is higher, he said. Martha looked down. You said that about the right side a moment ago. I have reconsidered. You are holding the ladder crooked. Abel shifted his boots. The sign settled level. Her uncle had cleared the rear room and left her the scarred bench, the shelves of oil and thread, and the front half of the window for her own work. 12 auction orders had become 17. 2 finished harnesses hung by the wall, and 3 new repair cards waited beneath the account book. Martha climbed down and wiped dust from her hands. Abel turned the right glove over. A small section near the wrist had begun to loosen where old leather met his uneven stitching. He did not place it on her table. Do you have time to look at this, he asked. Not today, if the work ahead of it matters more. Martha studied him before she studied the glove. I have time. He removed it and handed it to her. That small asking changed more than the seam. Martha sat beneath the window, took down the brass-handled awl, and pressed the leather wrapping tighter around its scratched handle. Abel remained beside the bench rather than wandering the shop and pretending he had somewhere else to be. She opened the weakened stitches. I used to think remembering Anna meant keeping everything as she left it, he said. The house, her cup, these gloves. Martha guided the awl through the cuff. Things do not remain as anyone leaves them. No. He watched the thread pass through his crooked work. They either change or they stop being used. Martha tightened the seam without covering his stitch. Abel rested his bare hand on the bench. I love the life I had with her. I will not speak of it as though it was something to outgrow. I would not ask you to. I know. His fingers moved once against the wood. That may be why I was so afraid to believe you wanted a place beside it. Martha set the glove down. Not beside your old life. In the one you are living now? He met her eyes. Then that is where I am asking you to stay. She fitted the repaired glove over his hand. The leather closed easily, shaped by years of work, rain, loss, and repair. Nothing about it looked new. Nothing needed to. Martha closed the account book on the best week her bench had earned since opening under her own name. She hung the wrapped awl above it and lowered the window shade against the evening sun. Abel picked up his hat. Would you take supper at the ranch? Are you asking because you broke another piece of leather? No, because you need help with your accounts. No. Martha reached for her cloak. Then I suppose I can listen to the real reason on the walk. Outside, the new sign moved gently above the door. Abel offered his arm, then seemed to think better of hiding behind courtesy. He removed both gloves and placed them on Martha's bench. This time, Abel left the old gloves on the bench and took Martha's bare hand home.